we are starting immediately, and our first panelist here is
Frangos.
Marina Frangos, and she will be speaking about a very important institution, because the whole session is about diasporic institutions and the third sector. She will be speaking about one well-known institution of the diaspora, which is the World Council of Hellenes Abroad, the SAE, since 2008. And I personally am looking forward to hearing, since I spent many years studying the SAE, so maybe we can have some debates after that.
Okay.
So we're ready. Ready.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm very honored to be here today. Do you need the microphone? You can hear me. Just let me check. Okay, that's all right. So I will begin right away. Now, I translated Richard Clogg's The Greek Diaspora in the 20th Century, and I'm very happy to be here because I associated St. Antonis College with him, and I hope that he is well. I don't know why he's not here.
He told me yesterday that he was coming, but he wouldn't be here for the whole day.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. Now to sadder things. I'm going to talk to you about the World Council of Hellenes Abroad. First part, I have a title, Diaspora Connections. So let's go to Wednesday, May 16th, 2018. It seemed to be just another ordinary day in the streets of Athens. There was the usual heavy traffic as one drove south on Central Kifisias Avenue. A closer look revealed the many shops that had shut down, presently displaying faded rental ads. The grass and bushes hadn't been cut or trimmed. Many potholes were left unrepaired, and the narrow, uneven sidewalks appeared unswept. Nothing reminded one of the Athens of yesteryear, the proud host city of the Olympic Games in 2004, when everything was clean and shiny, well-groomed and posh. Even so, passionate Greek politics was still present. At around 2 p.m. on that Wednesday, Council of State President Nikos Sakellariou resigned. No similar resignation had ever taken place in Greece, at least not after 1974. On that same day, May 16th, several news items could potentially draw the attention of anyone interested even mildly in the Greek diaspora. At 11 a.m., a special session was held at the Hellenic Parliament to commemorate May 19th, a day of remembrance for the Pontic Greek genocide. In another government building, the Minister of Interior, Panos Kourletis, called a meeting with leaders of the opposition parties where changes to the limits of electoral districts would be discussed. But Konstantinos Mitsotakis demanded that the issue of Greek diaspora voting rights be added to the meeting's political gerrymandering agenda. Meanwhile, in the evening, a book presentation of elderly Ioannis Varvitsiotis was being held at the Athens concert hall known as the Megaron. The Megaron is made up of several adjoining buildings, and another event was scheduled to commence in the Triandis Hall. It would be an evening honoring Dr. Stamatis Krimegis, a prominent Greek-American scientist with a distinguished career at NASA and Johns Hopkins University. Not a single Greek politician attended this event, though the hall was packed with academics and well-known businessmen. There was an abundance of irony at this glamorous gala, honoring the soft-spoken, distinguished member of the Greek diaspora. On April 26th, less than 3 weeks earlier, Krimegis had unexpectedly resigned from Greece's newly formed space agency. His public 3-page, carefully written letter of resignation is a blistering attack on Greek politics, where the government is accused of lack of transparency and meritocracy in running the new agency. Primizi's resignation letter could easily serve as a sad synopsis of another institution's brief history. All one has to do is replace Hellenic Space Agency with World Council of Hellenes Abroad, Ministry of Digital Technology with Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and General Secretariat for Communications and Post Offices with the General Secretariat for Greeks Abroad. That basically would sum up the unhappy tale of the World Council of Hellenes Abroad in 3 pages of a resignation letter. The World Council of Hellenes Abroad, known by its Greek acronym SAE, was founded in 1995 as an organization of organizations and sought to serve as essentially a parliament of global Hellenism. The institution's existence spanned from its majestic inaugural General Assembly in December 1995 to around 2012-2013. The last General Assembly was held in December 2006, electing an 11-member board for a 3-year term, which was later silently extended without elections through a Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs decree, also postponing the General Assembly and citing Greece's dire financial situation at that time. For the period 2009 to 2012, there was very little activity on the part of SAE. Despite this sorrowful finale, though, SAE's brief existence had been marked by some impressive efforts and accomplishments. Some of these are shown on this slide, but I want to stay within the 15 minutes, so I'm not going to go through that. However, let's go before the fact and talk about some ominous prophecies. When SAE's inaugural General Assembly was announced for December 1995, waves of enthusiasm spread throughout the numerous Greek communities in the 4 corners of the world. Though not many were certain of what the new institution would mean, it sounded promising, and SAE initially won the support of most major Hellenic organizations. Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs Grigoris Niotis had assumed the leadership of a sector he knew almost nothing about before his appointment, but this situation is quite common on the Greek political scene, especially where the diaspora is concerned. Nobody knows anything. They start going around, collecting data, then they change a month later, or 6 months later, or a year later. This process has been repeated many, many times. However, he soon embarked on this globe-trotting mission, and he really had good intentions. He was relatively young, generally praised by his colleagues as being thoughtful and determined. In March of that same year, Odyssey, a magazine published in Greece but founded by Greek-American Gregory Maniatis, the cover story was entitled, "Is There a Global Greek Village? The Puzzle of Global Hellenism," with the publisher and founder Gregory Maniatis bylining the 6-page article on the proposed Council of Diaspora Hellenism that included discussions with over 30 prominent members in the Greek diaspora. His article, 10 hours of discussion held by Odyssey with Niotis and his advisors, and access to SAE's working documents made available to Odyssey by ministry sources. Almost all those interviewed by Odyssey centered their concerns on 2 major themes. They were worried, and they were worried about 2 things. The first one was the need to differentiate among the substantially varied Greek communities abroad and the compelling need to avoid any direct link between the Greek state and the diaspora organizations made up mostly of citizens of other countries. George Savidis, speaking on behalf of AHEPA, was wary of any potential direct links between the Greek government and the Greek-American lobby. Savidis also stated that AHEPA had never been contacted by the Foreign Ministry, despite being the largest organization of Greek America after the Greek Orthodox Church. And these are some of the other people that were never contacted. It doesn't matter who's included in this list Odyssey had published then. What matters is we're talking about senators, businessmen, and other prominent members of the Greek American community. Despite the many diaspora and domestic voices that had expressed their reservations and concerns, SAE's inaugural General Assembly was hastily organized on the one hand, took place in early 1995, December. However, it was a very, very moving event. I was there and I remember it. It was very, very moving to see Greeks from all over the world, post-Cold War, Greeks from the Soviet Union, Greeks from America, Greeks from Australia, Greeks from Zimbabwe, Greeks from Israel. It was very, very moving. And it showed the potential of this global Greek community. Roughly half of Greece's cabinet ministers, as well as the presidents of Greece and Cyprus, spoke to 255 delegates and over 700 other diaspora guests in Thessaloniki. Probably the biggest boost that the institution received in its early years was the fact that Andrew Athens was elected as president. He also could afford to go on all these trips all over the world. Truly. He soon embarked on an ambitious project, initially known as the SAE Primary Healthcare Initiative, later renamed Hellenic Care. It is considered by many as SAE's greatest achievement because it aspired to create 22 clinics in 6 former Soviet Union republics. However, today, we don't know what has happened to these clinics. And in 2011, Andrew Athens is not the president anymore. A Hellenic Care press release announced plans to expand the medical program as part of a special grant from the U.S. Department of State. Now, one of the most basic problems that plagued SAE since its founding was that of representation. Exactly how were delegates chosen to participate in SAE's proceedings? How could an organization become a SAE member? Initially, it's logical in 1995 that the Greek government would do all the inviting. However, this continued until the very end. Other problems that we had. In 1995, I personally created a brief questionnaire for delegates at the SAE Founding General Assembly. It's amazing that all these advisors and all these people, I was just a volunteer then, coming from the States, enthused with this idea. And I'm very surprised still today that nobody thought, well, let's see who these people are. What language do they speak at home? When did they migrate? What did they do? Are they 4th generation, 3rd generation? How old are they? What education do they have? Nothing. I did this at the last minute because I was interested. And the data that I collected was, let's see, age distribution. At the first SAE General Assembly, the overwhelming majority was over 40 years old, 60% over 50 years old. Another anomaly was that 71% had been born in Greece, a percentage that was greatly inconsistent with the cross-generational total diaspora membership. For example, Americans of Greek descent were already in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th generations of migration in 1995, and yet 80% of the delegates from the USA were Greek-born at that time. Despite repeated promises that this would change by the second convention, it only dropped to slightly 65%, look, 65% at the third assembly. However, the harshest criticism on SAE for the entirety of its existence was that it was essentially an organization dominated by the Greek government, a justified claim if one considers that the Greek state financed the whole endeavor, provided offices for its Thessaloniki headquarters, and funded the salaries of several employees and other projects over the course of a few of those 15 years. Even the delegates thought that it was a government organization. 15% of them said that it's a government organization. Now, some reflections. As I don't have time, I have more detailed things here. The title of my presentation is Failed Institution. It's about SAE, whereas the SEESOX conference is on homeland diaspora relations in flux, Greece and Greeks abroad at time of crisis. This may mislead some observers to swiftly conclude that SAE's demise came because of the 2008 global financial crisis that led Greece into a decade of harsh austerity measures, capital controls, bailout loans from the IMF, the Eurogroup, and the European Central Bank, as well as the impoverishment and loss of income and property for a great number of the Greek people. This simply is not the case, in my humble opinion, at least regarding SAE, whose predicament was quite evident from the very beginning. Part of the problem lay in setting expectations too high, as it was obviously unreasonable to ever expect, even today, 11 people, SAE's board, to effectively tackle all the issues facing millions of diaspora Greeks in tens of countries. However, SAE suffered primarily because of its structural and organizational deficiencies, as was demonstrated briefly, and even more briefly than my writing here. It was doomed from the start to be unrepresentative of the Hellenic diaspora and thus incapable of forging a coherent mission for itself. As such, it primarily became a public relations vehicle for Greek politicians and a junket for professional Greeks the world over who flew to the homeland every 2-3 years for free. All of this hauntingly alludes to the recent story involving NASA scientists 20 years later, Stamatis Krimizish, and the aspiring new government creation of the Hellenic Space Agency. But then again, there's a greater picture to consider. Portions of the research I conducted, having attended all 6 SAE conferences, General Assemblies, had been used when I was writing SAE-related articles for Odyssey magazine. The magazine's story is another chapter of recent Greek diaspora tales worth taking a closer look at. Charles Moskos thought it was the best magazine ever. I have the quote, but I'm not going to read it because it's a little longer. For many, Odyssey was the only English language magazine to ever link Greeks and Phil-Hellenes around the world. Both SAE and Odyssey were created in the affluent mid-1990s and are now non-existent. Both of them, sadly, with signs of their eventual disappearance clearly present after 2008. This may very well be a coincidence, as SAE was essentially a Greek government project, and Odyssey was a private enterprise. On the other hand, this outcome can be attributed to the challenging difficulties any endeavor involving the diaspora as a whole is forced to deal with. The fact that a new Greek diaspora is in the making now, with thousands of young educated Greeks abandoning their homeland after 2010 in search of better employment prospects, only makes the need to plan and organize any new entities responsibly and thoughtfully more critical. On March 11, 2018, Terence Quick, the present-day Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, was interviewed on ERC3, Elas Pandou is the name of the program. He stressed the need to recreate SAE, as is required by the Greek Constitution. It's unbelievable that it's Article 108 in the Greek Constitution requires SAE to exist. He said, though, that I need to change the name. SAE, quote unquote, is a word our diaspora hears and freaks out. Quick was also adamant about the necessity for the new institution to be fully financially self-sufficient and independent of the Greek government. As a popular Greek saying goes, may your words leave your mouth and fly directly into God's ears. Reflecting on the experience with SAE and many other ambitious global projects undertaken in the past, it's safer to say little, prepare for the worst, and work diligently for the best. Thank you very much, and that's what I hope.
Thank you. That was excellent.
So this presentation is concerned with the elaboration of a conceptual framework for tracing and understanding the dynamics that shape the degree and the nature of the connection between diaspora and the homeland through the examination of these two cases from the public and private education domains. The research questions that we'll address are the following. Which factors influence the transmission of social remittances from the diaspora to the homeland in the broader context of diaspora philanthropy and volunteerism? What kind of dynamics are developed during this transmission in the public and the private spheres? Do they lead to connections or disconnections between diasporas and the countries of origin? What variables explain similarities and differences across the public and private spheres? We argue that conflicting dynamics in both the public and private spheres create a complex regime of disconnections that make diaspora philanthropy and volunteerism become a highly contestable process. Our conceptualization will be situated in the discussion of diaspora philanthropy, and to test our hypothesis, we'll use a methodology of a qualitative analysis of interviews supplemented by secondary data. In our analysis, the term diaspora primarily refers to the first generation of highly accomplished migrants in business, the professions, academia, who have the capacity and willingness to commit to their interaction with homeland institutions significant resources over time. Through the lens of diaspora philanthropy and volunteerism, contributions of their knowledge, skills, and expertise towards their homeland, and specifically in the domain of the private and public education, will be examined, arguably the most important aspect of diaspora philanthropy, with a much more profound, lasting impact on the country's social and economic development. So this is also known in the literature as the patriotic discount, which is the offer of services at low or zero cost by diaspora experts to the homeland. The second theme is one of the social remittances, and there's a debate in the literature on whether philanthropy and remittances can be used interchangeably or whether they are non-overlapping terms. And I quote here, social remittances are the ideas, behaviors, identities, and social capital that flow from receiving to sending country communities. Our two case studies, Athens College and University of Athens. We're focusing on the meso level, the middle sphere of engagement, the known community, to use the concept introduced by Ivan here. This presentation will examine the institutional conflicts of these two institutions, one from the private, one from the public sphere. Brief histories. A long-run institutional conflict has been going on since the mid-late 1990s in the private domain at Athens College. This institution has always had strong diasporic links with its key founders, many teachers, and many students originating from the Greek diaspora. Greece's leading private school is ruled by two governing boards, the Board of Trustees in New York, primarily comprised of alumni and members of the Greek diaspora, and the Board of Directors in Athens. After an extremely critical Blue Ribbon report, the so-called Harvard report, of the institution's culture, governance, and intense conflicts, the Athens Board of Directors initiated an effort to neutralize the influence of the New York Board of Trustees and to lead to its elimination through a lengthy litigation process. The litigation concluded in 2016 with a decision of the Supreme Court of New York in favor of the New York Board of Trustees. The Board of Directors in Athens made an extremely unwise choice to seek to prevail in a New York legal system. Just like Athens College, the diaspora's role in the case of the University of Athens goes back to the origins of the institution. But from the post-winter period and until 2011, the role of the diaspora was marginal. The 2011 higher education reform introduced the Institutions Council, Symbolia Dimaton in Greek, a new governing body for Greek state universities based on the Board of Trustees model. These councils brought Greece's scientific diaspora into positions of great influence, making them leading actors in the governance of Greek state universities, such as the University of Athens. More than 100 Greek diaspora academics from Europe and North America, in many cases from institutions of Ivy League and Oxford's levels of excellence, They were elected to non-compensated positions of these councils. The 2000 reform was, however, only partially implemented, as most of the changes that were attempted to be introduced were met with great opposition from some faculty members, student activists, and Greece's, at that time, left-wing opposition, the Syriza party. In the context of the debt crisis 5 years after the aforementioned reforms, the current government's determination to undermine the authority of the boards, coupled with the ongoing conflicts within the universities, culminated in the abolition and, for now, the end of the scientific diaspora's participation in the governance of Greek state universities, including that of Athens University. In our analysis of the 10 interviews that were conducted from January to May 2018, we'll unpack the degree and the nature of the connection between diaspora and the homeland. The results are categorized into the following 3 thematic axes. 1, identities of giving back. 2, conflicting narratives and contestation. 3, irreconcilable governance models. At both Athens College and the University of Athens, engagement was related to first-generation elite Greek diaspora members, primarily from universities or schools with an alumnus relationship, which is seen as a source of loyalty and commitment. In our analysis, school-based and university-based identification is a significant part of self-identification, or even homeland identification, and continues to be an important point of reference even decades after the interviewee's graduation. The diaspora identification at the elite level may lie in the membership of a particular profession, school, or university. As I mentioned, the relationship with the home country might be refracted and mediated through such a membership due to the perceived importance of the alma mater institution for the home country. Alternatively, or complementary, the institution's perceived as decisive impact on the accomplishments of the diaspora member in the host country creates feelings of loyalty and gratitude that in turn create a desire for active involvement in the institution's affairs. Furthermore, the individual and the collective are conflated in the mindset of the diaspora member who experiences personal success within an institutional setting, that of the host country, which can efficiently utilize graduates of Greek educational institutions. Maybe I can put that more simply. People feel that because of their education in Greece, they became highly successful in the United States, but they became highly successful in the United States because the US could make use of the skills. Let me now give you some relevant quotes from our interviewees. I'm going to go through 10 minutes, Effie. Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to give the quotes.
No,
no, because I have to go on to, yeah. So this is what the identity of giving back is all about. Given its powerful charge and sentimental pathos, the evocation of homeland can be used as a means of exclusion by those who remain at home. In this light, it is not surprising that diasporas can be negatively identified as the other, the identity of which is shaped through opposition with the self. In this context, another challenge of diaspora philanthropy and volunteerism is potential antipathy for the country of origin that lies in some of the following factors. To illustrate, homeland actors consider the diaspora as a potential competitor for power, donor resources, and legitimacy, or even as a political threat. Interviewees critical of the diaspora's involvement with the University of Athens ascribe the diaspora's engagement with the boards to a mixture of disinformation on the part of the Ministry of Education, with emphasis on the Ministry's perceived role as using the boards and the diaspora to attack the rectors, lack of knowledge and familiarity with the governance of the Greek University, patronizing attitude and arrogance that diasporas are in a position to transplant their experience. Contestation mobilizes conflicting narratives and interpretation, as in the case of the institutional introversion versus extroversion debate and the funding and governance debate. In the opinion of detractors of diaspora's involvement, funding should not carry any claims to governance, as lack of local presence delegitimizes such claims. In contrast, diaspora members argue that funding depends upon governance and planning, thus necessitating involvement of the diaspora actor. In addition, pro-diaspora interviewees regarding both the University of Athens and Athens College underline the interaction with the diaspora as a way to facilitate institutional extroversion. Moving now to reconcilable governance models. Contestation of the conflicting narratives that frame and drive it ultimately seeks to determine the governance regime that will prevail in these two institutions. The structure of the implementation environment is described through the interaction of formal and informal processes and practices. The nature of the country of origin regime is one of the multiple factors that are involved in diaspora engagement. Clientelism, centralization, non-accountability, and the lack of a clear framework are structural features of the local governance regime, which is challenged by its competing alternative, which is supported by members of the diaspora and their local allies. At both the University of Athens and Athens College, informality, non-transparency, lack of plans and policies to which an organization is accountable, and centralization are some of the main features at play in the governance regime. According to the OECD report of 2012, the Greek education system is the most centralized and the least autonomous. Indeed, in Greece, the control of the exceptionally centralized state administration has been the central pillar of clientelism, which pervades both the public and the private sectors, thus blaring the liberal public-private distinction. In addition, the university governance is based on a model of co-administration by groups and is comprised of various actors who tend to think of themselves as accountable to their voters. In this context, the law that brought into being the institutional councils of the University of Athens aimed to lessen the influence of political parties, increasing institutional autonomy from the state, and strengthening accountability and transparency. In that sense, efforts to curb the dysfunctions and inequities created by clientelism have been an essential, even inescapable part of every modernization project, as Mousikoudis points out. And clientelism refers to the exchange of select goods or material sources between patron and client in return for political support. And then when we look at clientelism, the two competing parties, the diaspora actors and the local stakeholders, they both have a different interpretation of Greek reality. The local stakeholders argue that one must content and reconcile himself with Greek reality. The diaspora actor argues that the Greek reality is not something which is, it's not an essential, it's essential is to say that this reality is bound to stay with us forever. This reality is a product of particular circumstances. It's imperative for Greece to overcome it both at the general and institutional level. And here I will use one of the numerous quotes that I have in the paper by a member of the Board of Trustees and a former member of Athens University's Council. That's Professor Kamaras at Princeton, who had the privilege of experiencing both institutional conflicts. And what he said is, what they invoke as the Greek reality is not a reality. They're actually referring to ideas that have been created by a previous stage of our society. They contribute to the so-called Greek reality to metaphysics or to profound psychology of the Greeks. There are no such things. There are bad habits and all habits can be broken. But many times we hide behind the Greek idiosyncrasy. They say that things in Greece are how they are. Are the things in Greece correct? They say it does not matter because this is the Greek reality. No, this is not how it is. Our society is always changing. In conclusion, I mean, this presentation is concerned with the elaboration. Sorry. Yeah. The identification at the meso level of members of the diaspora elite, which creates a giving back identity, means that the governance of educational institutions becomes a key site of contestation between diaspora actors and local stakeholders. After all, giving back means mobilizing resources in the service of specific aims. Resources and aims being the two main elements which constitute the diaspora elite's act of giving, which is to say, what they have acquired in the host country by virtue of the education and motivation imparted to them by their home alma maters. and both the sources and names call forth for accountability mechanisms and other governance changes which are incompatible with the governance model created, evolved, and controlled by the local stakeholders. Thus, contestation becomes inevitable across the public and private domains and between the diaspora elite and local stakeholders. Thank you.
I think it's your turn.
So the aim of this paper is on one hand to examine the evolution of the Greek teaching process within the community framework in Marseille, the interactions among the actors involved, and the evolution of students' Greekness through successive waves of diaspora. On the other hand, I was asked to do that also, it aims to map the current state of Greek primary education within the community framework in France, focusing mainly on the same characteristics presented in its organization and to raise questions as to its viability and effectiveness. A brief historical review. Early efforts for organized teaching of Greek in Marseille dates back to 1830, when classes were held at the church. In 1833, the General Consulate of Marseille was founded and a model Greek course was established at the Royal College of Marseille, only destined for the rich families' children. 20th century. The refugee waves arrived in Marseille, driven by the persecution of the Greek Christian element in Asia Minor. The immigrants recruited in the Dodecanese Islands by the organized immigration implemented by the French government during the First World War, and the vast wave of Greek refugees arrived after the Asia Minor catastrophe in 1923, constituted the group of old immigrants as opposed to the post-World War II new immigrants, who are less numerous in the city. In 1945, members of those old immigrants founded the Hellenic Union of Marseille and area, which remains one of the major Greek communities in the city today. Greeks, remunerated by this community, dispensed modern Greek courses in rented French schools classrooms. In 1971, teachers were seconded by the Greek state. School records started to be kept, and local administrators started to depend on the presence of secondary teachers whom they did not remunerate. It's very important. And consequently on Greek successive governments from whom they expected teachers to be posted. In 1976, Greek community of Marseille and its educational institute Solomos were created, introducing thus an era of competition. Secondary teachers were obliged to dispense courses in both communities. The period since 2010 has been marked on the one hand by the suspension of operation of the General Consulate of Greece in 2016 crisis, and on the other hand by the arrival of the new academic diaspora. The newcomers refer to the members of cities' earlier diaspora as Greeks of the diaspora, which implies that they do not consider themselves as belonging to that category. The creation of a new we, as opposed to the others, can therefore be observed in the city. However, the Greek school is their main gathering point. They are anxious that their children learn Greek, and they are thus forced to join the school system in the community context, as it is the only one in existence. School organization in Marseille. Students are divided into 3 periods. Each period corresponds to a different category, which presents a clear difference concerning their origin and their linguistic background. First period, 10 years. 1971 to 1980, where second diaspora parents prevailed. The second period, 30 years, 1981 to 2010, where mixed marriages prevailed. And third, post-crisis period, 7 years, 2011 to 2017, where Greek parents prevail again. It should be noted that while the second period covers 30 years of operation of the Greek school, the number of students registered is hardly greater than the one of the first period examined, which shows the decreasing trend of enrollments. Teaching process. During the first period examined, most parents came from a Greek monolingual environment. However, they spoke a Greek language altered by numerous interventions of French expressions or by local Dodecanese island idioms, and so spoke French to their children. The teaching aim was strengthening and preservation of the mother tongue, already difficult for teachers because teachers, they didn't speak perfect French. During the second period, progressively, the motivation for the preservation of the mother tongue declined among the students issued mainly from mixed marriages, and the more Greek language became foreign to the daily activities of students, the more they abandoned the Greek school. The transmission of knowledge became more difficult as the teaching aim was transformed into teaching Greek as a foreign language, task which teachers had not been prepared for. During first and second period, teachers in Marseille highlighted in their reports the problem of linguistic and age diversity of their students, their own incapacity to cope with those difficulties, and the absence of adapted educational material. Progressively, from 1999 and after from 2005 to 2010, teaching Greek as a foreign language was being upgraded by using adapted educational material and new technologies. However, the number of students continued to decrease. After 2010, the overwhelming majority of registered students are natural speakers of Greek language. Almost no need to teach Greek as a foreign language. Moreover, the new diaspora fostered an increasing tendency to enroll administrators and supervision. Greek schools in Marseille were initially founded by communities and were adapted according to their strategies and policies. Nevertheless, as is often the case in the Greek diaspora, the community's leaders acted as holders of power, as supervisors, and the secondary teachers defended themselves by protecting their autonomy as civil servants. Supervision in Greek language education abroad is carried out by the Minister of Education and by the education coordinator, consular before 1996. However, in Marseille, from the creation of the General Consulate, the General Consul had the role of supervisor concerning the Greek institution in the city. Consequently, the education coordinator's role was frequently attributed to him. This fact was often the source of an issue. What do I do? I touch it. No? Okay, everyone hears? Okay? I'm losing time.
It will be subtracted.
But I think it's out of battery or something. We have not much time. Παράταση θα πάρω, εντάξει. Okay. So, supervision. However, in Marseille, from the creation of the General Consulate, the General Consul had the role of supervision concerning the Greek institution and instruction in the city. Consequently, the education coordinator's role was frequently attributed to him. This fact was often the source of an issue that could be described as confusion of responsibilities as to the school supervision between consular authorities, educational authorities, and local administrators until the General Consulate in Marseille suspended its operations in 2016. Infrastructure and funding. Until 1981, Greek lessons in Marseille were dispensed in rented French schools classrooms. In 1981, Hellenic Union bought premises, and 2001, Greek community bought premises, and both acquisitions were made with the support of the Greek state. Until 2000, the two Marseille community covered exclusively the school's operating costs. From 2001 to 2010, the Greek school received a grant from which a part was distributed from the teachers to the two communities in order to contribute to some of the operating costs in proportion to the hours the Greek school functioned in the premises, as shown to the following table. In 2011, the account was closed and all operating costs were covered once again by the communities. We're going to France. Similar characteristics, school in France. Greek school in France. Schools are funded mainly by local administrators, so communities, church, parents, associations, etc. Where there are two sorts of administrators offering the same form of education, there is a tendency towards competition. They are housed in community or churches halls, rented classrooms, or in buildings intended for associative use. They operate principally twice a week for children courses. As to the teaching process, the problem of linguistic and age diversity of students and the resulting differentiation of knowledge acquisition is the most important similarity. Exceptions in Paris, where due to the large number of enrollments, students can be divided into quasi-homogeneous levels, and in Marseille, where the new diaspora enrollments allowed the same practice. Generally, New diaspora arrivals do not seem to have affected all Greek schools in France, except Paris and Marseille, and in all other cities there are always a constant mixed marriages and third and fourth diaspora generation students. Here is a general appreciation of the variation of the number of Greek schools in France within the 30 late years, pre-crisis, after crisis.
AC and BC.
Excuse me?
BC, before
Before
crisis,
BC,
and AC.
yes. The absence from the absence from the map of a Greek school using secondary teachers does not necessarily mean that there is no Greek education in the area. In many cities where Greek schools were closed after the crisis, the Greek communities continued their efforts to maintain Greek teaching sections by employing local staff. Courses for adult students. As Greek courses for children in France are dispensed only twice a week, teachers are considered to be underemployed. A direct consequence of this working status, the organization of courses for the adult students, which are considered necessary and legitimate in France already from 1983. Currently, as we see on the table, in many schools in France, French adult students have become more numerous than Greek diaspora students. Consequently, secondary teachers are more involved in the education of French adult students than in that of the children of the Greek diaspora. However, local communities regard the adult courses as a significant financial relief which serve to cover Greek schools' operating costs. Thus, communities rely enormously on the secondment of Greek teachers whom they do not remunerate. To integrate classes or not. The policy of the Greek ministry seeks to promote integrated forms of Greek education abroad. Integration of modern Greek into French primary education has been underlined since 1983, but not real progress has been made in this direction. In the 1970s, France signed contracts for teaching language and culture to children for working immigrants, ELCO. ELCO, this mainly involved primary education, and the courses were not integrated. By the reform of 2016, ELCO is replaced by EILE, International Language Teaching. This attempts to evaluate teachers by French educational system, evaluate courses by integrating them in the school curriculum, use seconded French-speaking teachers from partner countries, encouraging this, thus in cooperation with the partner countries. But the integration of modern Greek courses in the ELE program could systematize Greek language teaching in French primary education, valorizing secondary teachers' potential, although it could raise major problems because classes would not be composed entirely by Greek diaspora students as in the community framework context, and also the limited teaching time and the limited quality of teaching, comparing to the teaching in the framework, the community framework, where timetables are more flexible in general. I'm going to conclude. The upward trend of Greek-speaking student enrollment, especially in Paris and Marseille after 2010, could potentially result in a linguistic renewal in the student population, although its subsequent impact cannot be currently predicted. The increase of French adult students had changed the learning population, introducing a growing complex phenomenon throughout France, mainly after 2000. Intra-community differences still exist and fragment the forces of Greek communities. The drastic reduction in numbers of secondary teachers in France led either to the closure of Greek schools or to the recruitment of local staff where the financial resources of the communities allowed this. Official integration of Greek courses for diaspora children in France, French primary education requires a firm bilateral will and an educational policy focused mainly on the effectiveness and the future viability of integrated courses so as to avoid occasional or sporadic cases. It could be said that the Greek education within the community framework in France continues to be deeply rooted in existing community structures, although it's debatable effectiveness. It is also very important in the conscience of diaspora Greeks who continue to enroll their children in the Greek school. The question is how this education could be reorganized and better implemented in order to be more successful by supporting the communities and strengthening the existing system based on local staff or based on secondary teachers. Proposing also a pilot phase of integrated courses. The answers should not be found by trying to solve the problems of education in Greek diaspora in general, but after serious and thorough commitment to the specific problems of French reality. Thank you very much.